All right, so somebody asked me earlier, they were talking about the Trump thing. I think it's fucking nuts, especially considering what happened January 6th. The idea that you're going to write something like that out there about current sitting members of Congress, even though what they're doing and thinking it's not going to bring in insightfulness, especially in a very complex, very divided tinderbox of political, separation right now. But it did remind me of something. And it did remind me of something just because there was a president in history who did something not the same, but similar, but for a different reason. I think it was just really interesting to do, to talk about it because it's for a totally different reason. But speaking of, very, very divided politics and what's happening, it reminded me of another president. Let me tell you all about Zachary Taylor. We almost didn't have a civil war in this country. So, Zachary Taylor, okay? They called him Old Rough and Ready, right? Old Rough and Ready. Let me tell you about this guy. This guy probably never should have been president. Didn't want to be president, nothing like that. So, what happens is that this guy is in obscurity, okay? Now, he wasn't a big guy, okay? He wasn't a big guy. But the guy was about 5'8", okay? About 5'8", and he had short, stocky legs, right? Like he was like all torso, okay? Not very proportionate, whatever. So he never wanted to be in politics. So let me take you back. His dad was in the Revolutionary War. And was under Washington at Valley Forge. Like, his dad was like a legit fucking revolutionary soldier. He didn't know any other life. He came from a humble beginnings, barely educated, goes out, joins the army in 1808. And when he's in the army in 1808, he's sent out to do patrols in the newly purchased the Louisiana Purchase that we got from Napoleon for pennies on the dollar because he needed money to fight all his people over there. So he's out there, he's making a name for himself. Then comes the War of 1812. Okay, he's a captain in the War of 1812. Does pretty damn good in the War of 1812. Distinguishes himself. Moves up to a colonel, right? Then the Black Hawk War happens. Now, we could talk about the Black Hawk War another time. Fun fact, President Lincoln actually was in the military, in the army during the Black Hawk War. Now, he didn't fight. He was in charge of, like, sending correspondence and stuff. But he actually was in the Black Hawk War. And then he was in the Second Seminole War. So, obviously, he was in a bunch of controversial wars when we look back in history. But he was a soldier. He was a soldier, okay? That's all he cared about was war. But he wasn't really well known. But then came the Mexican-American War. Now, Mexican-American War. James Polk is the president. He's trying to push for expansion and getting, more land from Mexico. Texas is its own republic right now, and so he's like, we need to let them know. So Polk, the president, sends Zachary Taylor and his troops to the border. Right, takes them down to the river to kind of like agitate the Mexican forces. Because he wants to buy California from them, right? He's trying to buy it from them. They don't want to give it up, right? Because back then, modern day California and Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Texas, this was all Mexico. Modern day California and the states here and some of Utah and Texas, right? Texas is a republic they're trying to become a republic at the time, is a republic, whatever you want to call it. And so he wants to buy California. So he sends Zachary Taylor down there. Mexican troops fire on him. Boom, Mexican-American War pops off. They fire it off. Taylor wins that battle and then goes on to fucking crush every single engagement that he is involved in. He leads them. One of his troops, one of his officers was Ulysses S. Grant, who went on to lead the Civil War for the Union at the end and became a president as well, right? And even Ulysses S. Grant later on said Taylor was wild. He was like he was so calm in the middle of these battles. Like, he would just calmly tell his troops what to do. He would calmly walk on the field, fire. Like, he was just like fucking stone cold, right? Just totally calm under all this, right? So the dude ends up becomes a national hero, right? Becomes a national hero and ends up going on a nonstop winning streak. Ends up being the one who basically, all the other guys got the, Sam Houston and all those guys ended up getting all the credit for it. But it was really him that kind of like led the thing. Now, of course, history would say it's kind of fucked up what we did to take the land, but we're just going to focus on him right now. Okay. Dude goes off and decides, you know what? I just want to live a quiet life in the military. I want to stay in the military and just kind of be myself. Everyone thinks I'm a hero, whatever. All of a sudden, the Whig Party, right? The Whig Party goes, we want this guy. This guy's a hero. We need somebody to energize the base. We want him to be our nominee. Now, they told him they wanted to be the nominee, but he kind of just shrugged it off. He didn't even know he was the nominee when he became the nominee. He didn't go to the convention. They elected him as their nominee. He had no fucking clue. This guy had never voted in an election in his life. Not a local election, not a state, not a territory, not a national election. Never once voted in his life. Dude didn't care about politics at all. He even told the Whig Party, listen, if I'm your nominee, I'm your nominee, but I'm not going to be a Whig. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to be a Whig. Okay, I'm my own guy. I don't have like, I'm not a slave to any party. I'm not a fucking, loyal to any party. I'm just me. Okay, and you need to understand that. I'll be your nominee and I'll have your name on my thing, but I'm not gonna do what you want me to do. And they're like, fuck it, we don't care. We need a W. If it works, it works. Okay. He becomes president. First thing that happens is we're looking at this guy, Henry Clay. So Henry Clay is the like leader of the South, right? So like the South is like the Republicans and the North is like the Democrats, because this was a different time. The parties kind of switched over time, but he's like the leading there, and he's really pushing for slavery expansion, right? And so we're moving west. We just won the Mexican-American War. You know, even when Taylor took over, a lot of the party, his own party, was wanting them to take even more land from Mexico. He's like, nah, I think we took enough. So they want to expand, like the Missouri Compromise, and now they're trying to make new states come into the statehood, right? And so they say, hey, listen, you know, we want to let California, New Mexico come in, but they're likely going to be free states. Now, interesting enough, Zachary Taylor owned slaves. He owned slaves. He had plantations in like 3 or 4 different states. He owned slaves, but he was opposing slavery in the new states. He didn't want slavery to be, he didn't want to push for slavery in these new states, okay? Again, didn't say the guy was a good guy, but just hear me out, okay? There's a lot of problems, but it was the times, right? So he actually opposed it. He didn't want the new states to be slave states, even though he had slaves himself. So Henry Clay and all of the politicians from the South decide we are going to threaten to succeed. Remember, this is 1848. So Henry Clay and the South say, we are going to succeed if you don't do this great compromise with us. And so what does Zachary Taylor, the president of the United States, do? He tells them, try it. If you do, I will personally lead the United States Army into your states, and I will arrest you and try you for treason and hang you in front of everyone. True story. Dude legitimately tells the Southern politicians, I'm not saying it's a good thing. Again, I'm just saying this reminded me of this. But he said, if you try to succeed, I will literally hang you, like lead the army to round you up and try you for treason and hang you. Wild shit. Okay, of course, this is 150 years ago, so things were different. But this is what the guy does. He just threatens to lead the army himself and hang them as traitors if they try to succeed from the United States in order to keep slavery and everything like that, right? Like or try to like be upset because of the new states. He gets so pissed, he ends up endorsing California and New Mexico to become states. He was on the fence about it, but he's like, you know what? They're probably going to become free states. There's a lot of upset, people in the South. They want it to be slave states. He says, you know what? Fuck that. Okay, I will lead the army. I will try you for treason and hang you. And you know what? I'm going to endorse it to become states. And I know they're going to be free states. So Henry Clay goes, oh shit. Oh, we fucked up. Okay, all right. How about this? How about we do a compromise? Okay, because we're a controlling a big part of Congress. We have a lot of these states. We have if you want legislation push, you got to have us on sides. Let's do the compromise of 1850. Compromise 1850. So now he's like, all right, do this. All right. He called it the grand bargain, right? So he said, all right, how about this? How about if we let California come in as a free state, but we let New Mexico and Utah come in, but they get to choose for themselves? Seems a little bit sneaky, but maybe works it. Oh, but then Henry Clay fucked up. We also want to strengthen the Fugitive Slave Act. Now, the Fugitive Slave Act was an act that allowed people that owned slaves in the South, if their slaves were able to escape and flee to the North, they were allowed legally to go after them and recapture them. Even if they were in the North, which was free of slaves, the Fugitive Slave Act allowed them to go or put a bounty to get them and reclaim them as their property. Fucked up times, but that's what it was. Well, that's where he fucked up, because even though Taylor had slaves himself, he fucking hated the Fugitive Slave Act. He hated that shit. I don't know what the whole thing is, but that's just how he was, right? So he tells Henry Clay to go fuck himself. Okay, remember, this is all within the first 6 months of his presidency. So now the southern states realize, okay, we're kind of fucked here. We're not going to get what we want here. We can't threaten to succeed, and they're not compromising. They're not booting the Fugitive Slave Act. Like, all right, we're kind of fucked here. 6 months into his presidency, 3.5 years to go. A few days later, after basically telling them, or a few weeks after telling them to go fuck themselves, there was a legislation that was passed, and there was a big party at the Washington Monument. Big party at the Washington Monument. And Zachary Taylor goes there, and he has a meal of raw cherries and iced milk. Seems like a normal little thing. The next day, he develops stomach pains, and it gets really fucking bad. A couple weeks later, he dies. Now, there has been a lot of belief that he was poisoned. The reason is that Millard Fillmore was his vice president. Then you had Buchanan, and then you had Lincoln. Fillmore did absolutely nothing but try to make himself look good. Buchanan was so fucking old and pushover that it allowed the southern states to coalesce and re-strengthen, and then succeeded. Lincoln came in. Lincoln got the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery, the Civil War ends. Okay, and then a Southern sympathizer kills him. So people think that he was poisoned by Henry Clay or somebody that's located within that party. This has gotten so prevalent that they actually exhumed his body a few years back to test it. But the decomposition and everything like that, it kind of is hard to. They didn't find anything, but it was very difficult to see because of how long it had been. One fun fact though is that Zachary Taylor was the last president ever voted voted president that wasn't either a Democrat or Republican. So I don't know. I wasn't planning this today, but when somebody brought up the whole thing earlier, and I obviously said my piece on it, it reminded me about a president who did something similar, obviously completely different and different circumstances and different reasons, and not compare at all, but it just triggered a memory of, oh shit, there was a president who was like the least president person we ever had. Like literally Zachary Taylor's first ever vote in his life was his own presidential election. Like the dude wanted nothing to do with politics. Didn't even know he was the nominee, and just went in like the military guy that he was. But I thought it was interesting because there's belief that if Zachary Taylor had lived out his presidency, there wouldn't have been a civil war, or it would have been a different type of political thing than a military thing. So thought you guys might find that interesting. Maybe it's just me. I find these little historical things kind of fucking cool and interesting. But I just thought the story of Zachary Taylor, nobody really knows about him because he was only president for 6 months and he wasn't really a big name or something like that. And it was kind of like in that gap between Andrew Jackson and Lincoln that nobody really pays attention to. But I thought it was an interesting story.